Okay, so let's begin. Welcome, everybody. Good morning or afternoon, wherever you may be located. My name is Lisa Peterson, and I'm the VP of Business Development for Airspace Link. And I will be moderating this exciting panel that we have today. So just want to make sure you are attending the right webinar. This is called A Blueprint for Safe Community Drone Integration. And our panel of experts today are going to talk about regulatory policy updates, technology updates, and of course, the role of local governments and how they may participate in the safe and scalable growth of the drone industry. So we're looking forward to getting a short presentation from all of the panelists, and then we'll save 15 minutes at the end of the presentation for question and answer. And I will be monitoring the Q&A, so you can feel free to ask questions throughout the panel by using the Q&A. Just type your question in and I'll be monitoring that. Some other housekeeping items before we get started. If you have any technology questions in launching Zoom or accessing the webinar, you can go send in your technical difficulties into the Q&A and someone will try to respond to that. We will also be recording the presentation, so you will get a version of this presentation and a thank you email at the end. And it will also go out to participants who could not attend, so it will be also available on the Airspace Link website. So now that the housekeeping is all taken care of, now we can get to the exciting stuff. So I'm very excited to introduce the panelists, and in fact, I'm not going to introduce them, they're going to introduce themselves. So please go ahead and we can start with you, Michael. Tell us who you are, what you do, and what is Airspace Link's role in the drone ecosystem?
Excellent. Thanks, Lisa. I appreciate you moderating this. And yeah, so I'm the co-founder, president, and CEO of Airspace Link. So what's that mean I do? A lot of nothing. But, you know, we came up with the vision of Airspace Link is really to create a world where the safe integration of drones fuels human progress, advancing social equity, the environment, and the economy. And there's a lot to that. Maybe I'll touch on that as we go. But I've spent the past 2 decades building location technology companies and driving the growth in the drone and UAS transportation and geospatial industry. I'm serving a 3-year term on the Esri Partner Advisory Board, so really built into the GIS ecosystem. A part of the FAA Beyond program in 3 locations throughout the U.S. We're an FAA approved land supplier. We're a member of the Women in Drones, part of Drone Responders, small UAS Coalition, Commercial Drone Alliance, associates of Unmanned Vehicle System Integrations Committee. We're part of ASTM Standards Group. I'm a mentor in several high schools and college here and around GIS and drones, and I'm a drone pilot. So that's a mouthful, but those are the types of things we're involved in to help scale drones safely here in the US. So thanks, Lisa.
Hey, thank you. How about over to you, Terry? Explain your role at Esri and how you fit into the drone ecosystem.
Sure. So I'm Terry Bills. I'm the transportation industry manager at Esri, and actually I've been at Esri for about 16 years now. So we at Esri had actually been involved with Airspace Link and with Michael really from the start. So we'll speak a little bit more to that a little bit later, but we're certainly very honored really to be the underlying technology behind behind Airspace Link's technology. So we at Esri obviously spend a great deal of time and effort focused on drones. We see it cutting across a wide range of industries, obviously transportation, utilities, really the AEC community. We see really construction management, on major infrastructure projects. They're really using drones to really sort of monitor the progress on a daily basis. And ultimately, logistics, I think we're going to see that drone technology is going to revolutionize pickup and delivery. So that's a little bit of what we want to discussed today, really of how local governments and how governments can help prepare for that in the future. So.
Great, thank you, Terry. Really excited to dig into that a little bit later in the panel. Okay, Chris Girdwood, if you could introduce yourself, what your role is, and how does Detroit Aerotropolis fit in?
Thanks, appreciate it, Lisa. Hi, everyone. Chris with Aerotropolis. Detroit Region Aerotropolis is an economic development organization. It's a public-private partnership. And so government and industry coming together to embrace emerging technologies in the transportation, distribution, and logistics industry. Aerotropolis is home to DTW, which is the 18th busiest airport in North America, and also Willow Run, which was the arsenal of democracy. And what we're doing is building on those assets and trying to understand how intermodal, multimodal freight works in all three dimensions. And so in a presentation later on, we'll talk about autonomous vehicles on the ground and how they work with autonomous vehicles in the air, and why we became one of the first customers of Airspace Link to really identify those solutions, to test those solutions safely, and bring this emerging technology to our region. So happy to dig in a little later on. Thanks.
Great, thank you very much, Chris. All right, so now this is where the exciting stuff comes in. So we're going to have each panelist present a short presentation about your perspectives on the industry, focus a little bit on policy making, and then what the community leaders that are attending this webinar should be taking away from this. So Michael, let's start with Airspace Link.
Excellent. Let's see, sharing my screen now. And I'm going to turn off my video just because I'm having a little bit of an internet issue here. So I'll get started. So think about Airspace Link. It's well, first, what we're not. We're not a drone company. We're not necessarily a data collection company. We're not software. We're more of an infrastructure. Some people see us as a Waze for drones, the mapping systems, but the roads don't necessarily exist yet. So we're collaborating with the FAA, state and local governments to help build out that digital infrastructure, and in some cases, physical infrastructure required for surveillance. And that's our sweet spot, and that's where we spend a lot of our time, which, as you can imagine, is a lot of time with all levels of government, from federal, state, county, regional, MPOs, and cities that want to adopt this technology or move faster. And then ultimately, today's conversation is a little bit more on the lighter side. It's really the safe integrations for your recreational, your residents, and some commercial operations within the community. So one of the things that I said I wouldn't do on this is do videos, but I'm still going to try and do videos. So think of this as really the next key infrastructure. And our core purpose as a company is to really safely integrate drones into the national airspace and our communities at scale. And in order to do that, we had to set up some pretty significant partnerships to scale and make it happen. And one of those is with the FAA. We are what's called a LANC supplier. That's low altitude authorization notification capability. So we're integrated with the over 700 airports. That makes it easier for pilots to authorize flights in controlled airspace, understand temporary flight restrictions where they can and can't fly, and actually communicate with air traffic control towers in real time. So this is a system that's been put in over the past couple of years, and we'll talk a little bit more about that, but that's really from an airspace standpoint. Airspace Link is supporting those operations across the entire US. On the other side is we've partnered with Esri as our platform for storing a lot of data, but it also allows us to integrate quickly with state and local governments. I think over 90% of all state and local governments use a GIS to manage their data, which is really important for understanding compliance of advanced operations, where the schools, the land use, the zoning, the traffic counts, any data that can be helpful in understanding the hazards on the ground. Helps with the FAA being comfortable with certain types of compliance, and the operators that have a certain type of airworthiness of their drone. And you can put in that airworthiness, and it will tell you your probability of hitting someone on the ground. So there's just, if you can imagine, about 50 different layers of data. But when it comes from a local government, it really helps with understanding where there's special events going on, and a lot of information that most national systems don't have communities understand and know what's going on the ground, whether it be a 911 call or a parade. And that's really important. If I'm going to create an operation within someone's city, it's good to know that. So there's a lot going on, and we'll see how this comes through. But just to give you an example of where we started, we started on these little beachheads throughout the U.S. You'll hear about Detroit Aerotropolis in the upper left. This is just this month doing drone delivery within their municipal golf course. So it's really awesome where Detroit Aerotropolis has set up this system for multiple cities, and now operations are starting to happen within these communities under Part 107 operations, but also starting to get into more advanced operations and introducing it into the communities. And we'll talk just a little bit about how it started. It didn't necessarily start here. It started with, hey, we don't want any drones, to how do we support drone operations throughout this region. And then we last month we had operations within Ontario, California, the other side of the country, where their operations doing beer delivery. So this is really neat, where the city is working with Brookfield Properties that's developing 59,000 new homes. And they are building drone-friendly communities where they're doing package delivery within that community. So the property developer is building takeoff and landing locations, and now the community has a better idea of how and where flights need to be set up, where the safe areas to fly, and then introducing it to their community. So a lot of really great things happening throughout the U.S. We have upstate New York, Syracuse, New York, doing COVID test kit deliveries between hospitals. So not about just food to people, but also hospital deliveries of lab tests, and it's all about speed and convenience of getting those tests done quicker instead of driving them back and forth through the city. Is just launching them across those areas. And then on the bottom left, that's Lisa and on Ohio, and that was pretty neat, where they're doing an organ delivery. And for every 10 minutes that an organ is outside of the body, it loses a year of life. So this is working with Workhorse, Moog, Vertex to drive this Workhorse vehicle that has a drone built in, and then the drone takes off if it gets caught in traffic. In this case, it took off, and it took the organ to the airport, directly to a helicopter, loaded onto the helicopter, which was an autonomous helicopter as well, and took that to the hospital. So really neat use cases that are happening throughout the U.S. I'm just going to pause some of this, hopefully. But one of the biggest ones is the one on the right. That is North Dakota, Thales and this Vantis group, where they said, all right, we will invest and help the FAA, work closely with the FAA to put in the expensive surveillance system, communication network, so that you can bring a drone to the state of North Dakota, onboard it into the system, and then provide a complete surveillance system for the entire state, communication networks, and quickly get you approved to fly beyond visual line of sight throughout the entire state. So we see it at all different levels coming in at the city, the county, and the state. But all those videos and everything you just saw that's going on with introduction of drone delivery and drone capabilities, road inspection, public safety use, it didn't start like that for us as a company a year ago. And Chris from Aerotropolis will mention, is the first time I met with one of their cities, this was their reaction. How do we keep drones out of the area? We have no idea what the rules and regulations are, where flights happening, where they shouldn't be happening. It was really interesting because they're in controlled airspace. But this is sometimes the reaction of citizens in state and local governments, and it's our job as a company is to introduce tools to support. Well, it's kind of like the first cars on the road. How do we bring them on smoothly and allow them to scale without scaring anyone, and putting those tools in place. So to give some context to the state of the market today, and I relate this to roads because it's easier for non-aviation people to understand. So I think of this as, so 2016 is where they put in a lot of the rules and regulations for more commercial use of drones, not just recreational, but what we call Part 107 commercial operations. So think of that as taking tests to get your license. So now I have a license in place. Second, it was in 2017 is Lance was put in place. And think of that as a lightweight air traffic control system, and that's what Airspace Link signed an agreement with the FAA to help provide those services for the FAA. So we provide those services to authorize and communicate with air traffic controllers throughout the entire US. And then they put into place registration of your drone. So now I have a license and I've registered my drone. You can see where this is going. I've registered my drone, I have my license, and then the next step it was in 2020 and through 2022 is what's called remote ID. And that is, there was rules and regulations put in place for flights over people, flights at night, and remote ID. Our system actually just launched with this 2 weeks ago to support the ability to fly legally at night within the land system. But there's also a period of time over the next year and a half, where all drone manufacturers here in the US have to sell drones that broadcast their location. That is, think of that as a license plate. So now I have my license, I have my registration, and I have a license as I fly through the sky. So I'm authorizing my flight to know where I'm going to fly over what period of time. And then now there will be a mechanism in the future over the next year where different types of public safety will be able to understand, is that flight authorized? Are they supposed to be flying there? And that really starts to tie this all together. Some of the other big things that are happening in the market is the FAA type certification over here on the right. There's about 14 companies going through their Type 135 certification as an air carrier or different types of capabilities. Think of this as getting a vehicle approved. This is, in this case, their airworthiness. And getting the miles on the drones, and how often does it crash, and does it have all the safety mechanisms required to safely fly through communities. So that is happening now, where over the next few months, these drone companies, you hear about UPS and Flytrex and Matternets and different companies are getting their drones approved. So now we have all these licenses, registration, remote ID, the drones are approved to fly. Now we're at the point of, well, the infrastructure to support it. How many people can they fly over? How many roads? What are the speed limits of the roads they're able to fly over? What angle can they fly over the roads? So really complicated rules and regulations. You can imagine this is a really big geospatial problem. And then how do we set up takeoff and landing locations? And how do we even permit that? Or do we permit it? Or in this case, like in Ontario, California, and what we're doing in Detroit Aerotropolis is, finding brownfields as great takeoff landing locations and using zoning and certain types of property characteristics to set up these takeoff and landing locations. So engaging with the communities is becoming more and more important as we start to commercialize this. So one of the last big things that we're working on is the actual infrastructure and the digital infrastructure that we built here with some of our partners to start to do this advanced operation. So more to come on that, and it's happening as we speak over this next 12 months. Is you will start to see that integration of drones into our national airspace pretty quickly with all of these things coming together at once this year. So as a community, how do we even, why? What is the problem with this, and do we even want to support? Well, there's different areas where you support. Number one is, it is difficult today to know where to fly legally. I'm a pilot, and when I travel, it's very hard to understand what are the rules and regulations, what's the airspace like within this community. 40% of the population is in controlled airspace and actually is required to use a tool like Lance to authorize their flights. There's a bunch of ordinances out there that we try and put into a system, but they're always changing, and who owns the airspace is always changing. So we put a system in place that's constantly changing with any of those rules and regulation changes. So me as a pilot, I don't have to figure that out. Then the whole idea of really being able to use drones to do roof inspections and those types of things is coming online, and it does become more complex with building safety cases and compliance, and then ultimately scaling that. And really what we're starting to see is it's coming around, start helping build out a shared infrastructure for these operators to sit on top of, because some of the capabilities and surveillance systems are required for this. but the opportunity is pretty amazing. There's a few challenges, but I grabbed this as an example. This is for 500,000 or a million population city, I forget. So new mobility options. It's not replacing, it's complementing any other transportation. It might be integrated with ground transportation. Saving lives. We're tracking how many lives are saved every week. Will it be drones, finding someone in the woods, different use cases for drones, new job opportunities, certain type of pilot jobs. We currently have about 205,000 commercial drone pilots in the market. A lot of cost recovery opportunities here for consumers. The analysis is showing that about 22,000 people with mobility challenges would be able to get access to prescriptions and medication that we're actually working on with some hospitals. Some of the areas that we look at is being green. We're looking at about 294,000 miles, a million miles per year in road use, and reducing car accidents as well, along with CO2 emissions. Which is really important to us, is how do we match a package with the size vehicle? In some cases, a lot of things I'm ordering on Amazon are under 5 pounds and are within the range of getting those delivered quickly. So some of the challenges we are working through is working with communities and making sure that we don't have drones scaring communities, and bringing city officials and county and state and regional governments and Department of Transportation up to speed on educating their communities, but also having good answers when they get these questions and the data and tools to support that. So how do we do that? So we're a technical, we're a software company. So what do we do? Well, if you know anything about GIS, it's all about mapping systems and models and so on. So we worked with the FAA, NASA, JARIS, ASTM, and MITRE, and these are modeling companies to help model out the best ways to flow through a community or fly through them. And it's not just air risk and hazards, but it's also ground hazards, and putting in your type of drone and telling you hourly where the best places to fly. So it's being used as AirHub for government. It's on the Esri marketplace for government. If you have a government email, it's used for transportation planning, risk modeling, advisory management, things that are going on the ground, flight reports. Start to answer how often flights are happening within our communities. Remote ID will start to be built into this, where you'll be able to start to see real time where flights are happening. Being able to publish this data, any permitting and ordinances that might be in those locations, we load into the system, and so on. So there's a lot of data exchange between the FAA and the local governments that allow us, that when we take the data with the federal system, we publish those through APIs and through our system. And that is what's called AirHub for pilots. Now, this is consumed in some of the largest logistics companies, but also into your residential users. So it's a free app that we provide to residents for recreational flights and Part 107. The only time it starts to get monetized is if it's complicated, where you're going to fly beyond visual line of sight. You have to build a safety case. You have to involve a bunch of different stakeholders. That's where those roads, in some cases, are I wouldn't say are monetized, but it would cost millions to get these authorizations, and our goal is to get it down to extremely cheap. You wouldn't even think twice about it to get an advanced operation deployed. So that local government data flows up into the low altitude authorization notification capability system. It allows for very simple flights to advanced, helps you build your safety cases, and works on the beyond visual line of sight waiver process. So this can all be very daunting, and you say, wow, there's a lot going on. How do we participate? How do we even start? Who in our staff would even do this? So what we found last year is, as we were working with these local governments, we needed a way to package this. And we did, and we really put it into 4 simple steps for state and local governments and it's called the FLYSAFE program. And if you understand GIS, it's very simple. Number 1, sign up. You need a government email account. You get onto the system. This is all hosted in ArcGIS Online. It's in the ArcGIS marketplace. If you know GIS, it's pre-approved. It's almost like a plugin into your system. We have a state and local government specialty so that we've been certified, so that it makes it easy for your IT departments to integrate this system. It really just takes a day and 10 minutes of work for us to configure the system for your community. From there, we integrate, we do connect to some of your data, and a lot of GIS folks know that, the land use, the zoning, and then we put that into the models. So that models out your entire community. In this case, this is an example of Chicago, and rail systems and waterways and certain different types of air and ground characteristics start to open up the hazards and the risks of flying through these certain areas. And this is starting to be used by companies for site selection. Where are the best communities to launch first? And by you getting your data into this, you get more granular data, more accurate data of how to integrate and communicate and fly through these communities. Third is author and publish. So once it's been reviewed by our system and we feel that it's an accurate data set, and we combine it with our federal system and we publish it out through our federal system. Now, the way people access it, it's on the FAA website. If you go to FLYSAFE in the US, we're on the LANCE website, and you can access, your data is exposed through that if you're on the platform a little bit more advanced. But it helps with citizens flying safe, also helps with Part 107, and then it's also being used with some of these large retailer and logistics companies to figure out where are the best places to start operations sooner than later. And we're working with several of these companies as well. And then finally, 4 is, this is one of my favorites, is there's a lot of things happening. All this data is in APIs. It's Esri compatible. It's future proofing. It's used for site selection. It's used for compliance. It's used for creating all these types of operations. And I pulled up the screenshot because this is our remote ID. We have it up and running in certain cities throughout the US. But this is great. This is in LA, and I just pulled this up and I can see that there is a drone that is flying 13 feet above the highway at 11 o'clock at night, and at 0 flight height. So there's a lot of red flags going off there. So we actually have this running. Some communities already have access to it. There are sensors deployed throughout the US that are being put in place, and this is a great example of we have it running in some locations with some of our partners that you would start to understand how often and where flights are happening in near real time right now. And as the rules and regulations come into place, it will see who will help enforce that and support the safe operations within your community. So that's it for Airspace Link. I think the only takeaway is that everything and all the videos you saw and everything with Aerotropolis, they all started at the same spot. It was just signing up and trying to figure out how to get data uploaded into our system. And then in most cases, it takes off from there. We notify the local businesses of this capability, and that's where the interest starts. In Aerotropolis, it's, how do we do just-in-time parts delivery along our supply chain for a lot of the manufacturers in the area? That's our industry, and that's where we're getting some uptick on that. So with that, I'm going to pass it back over to you, Lisa.
All right. Thank you, Michael. You make it sound very simple. So I think that is our goal, simplify. All right. So Terry, I have you on the agenda next. So we're going to hear from Terry Bills from Esri, who will speak about Esri's role in the drone industry.
Okay, great, thanks. And like Michael, I think I'm gonna keep my camera off. Sometimes I also have issues. So anyway, again, it's a pleasure to be here and happy to join the webinar today with Airspace Link. As I mentioned, we're certainly proud and honored to be really sort of the underlying technology in the Airspace Link applications. We've actually, as I mentioned, we've worked with Michael from the beginning. So we've actually done a series of articles and really promotions to highlight really the good work. This one you're going to hear more of. This is really an article we did about the Aerotropolis was published, I don't know, I guess last fall. So and there is a link if you want to read about that, or you're certainly going to hear a lot more about it very shortly. So so to begin, why is this really important for governments? Well, let me a little bit of background. Alphabet's drone delivery service, which is called Wings, they just announced that they made their 100,000th delivery. Most of those took place in Australia, but that's really where they're testing the concepts. So they're really ramping up. Additionally, Walgreens has partnered with Wings, looking at how they can deliver prescriptions, while CVS has partnered with UPS's drone service for the same purpose. How do they use drone deliveries for pharmaceuticals and prescriptions to patients? And then Walmart actually made a significant investment actually in Drone Up, one of the leading drone delivery services. And of course, then there's Amazon, and they're actually testing all of their delivery capabilities as well at the moment. So these are really all of these companies and many, many more stand really ready to kind of revolutionize what we call the pickup and delivery service market. So ultimately, the message that we have at Esri is that, you know, local, county, and state governments really need to get out ahead of this trend. Otherwise, you're really going to be unprepared for the surge when it does occur. And then we're really sort of in the very, very early stages, but most people do expect that it's going to ramp up very, very quickly in the near future. So again, why should local governments be concerned? Well, to start, it really is about safety. And I think, as Michael explained, safety is one of the initial drivers. As one city manager told me, you don't really want to have drones dropping on people's heads down the line. So it really is about defining where drones can safely go and not go in your community. So many cities are already utilizing drones in their public safety programs. And so a number of cities probably already have a good experience with drones and really how they can be used. And we've certainly seen a very large uptake in drone delivery among our, as I mentioned, our architectural and engineering companies, as they use drones together with LiDAR really to monitor construction activity, grading, and really now increasingly even interior construction activity, measuring that against completion schedules and project tracking. But as I mentioned, I really think it will be the commercial pickup and delivery market that really stands to revolutionize the way that we shop and the way that we have deliveries made to our homes. So we'll come back to this point in a minute, but a second key driver is really economic development. And you'll hear that message very strongly made by Detroit's Aerotropolis. But I think a number of very forward-looking cities are beginning to look at how can they utilize drone readiness and drone enablement as keys really to their economic development strategies. And I think a key question is, will drone friendliness and drone readiness become key factors in economic site location decisions? And are the drone highways that we talk about, are those really actually a new form of digital infrastructure that forward cities are really looking to? So in that regard, we are talking to one city that really sees drone readiness as a key differentiator and a key part of their development strategy. And as Michael mentioned, they've actually worked with a developer to design the first drone-ready subdivision, designed to prepare the community for the coming drone deliveries. So much like our existing transportation networks, the task is really defining the new air networks or air corridors that really are allowable in your city. Much like regular air navigation, where pilots are given a defined route and coordinates, it works very much the same way with drones. And pilots and planes have such things as restricted and prohibited airspace. And you want to think in similar terms. And where do you not want drones to fly in your community, and where is it acceptable and in fact desirable to fly? And those are the key considerations. And let me also state that I think that cities can really leverage drone activity to their advantage, or ultimately to their detriment. And I think it's just like we heard in the case of Detroit, they're really looking at autonomous vehicles. Well, I think just like the coming of autonomous vehicles, city planners really can and should play a significant role to help define whether drones and whether autonomous vehicles will play a positive or a negative role in their communities. Because if you don't define and regulate drone activity in your community, then you may likely suffer from what could be sort of drone chaos. That is, that drones will fly wherever they choose and regardless of your wishes as a community. And looming even more significantly, I think, in the future is that we're not just talking about drone deliveries, but we're really talking about the future of urban air mobility, or what we often call air taxis. And just as an example, already in China, there's a company called EHang that's flying roughly about 100 autonomous air routes in China using drones to taxi persons from location to location. And there are a number of air mobility providers that are really sort of targeting the next 5 years for starting service with human air mobility. So all you need to do is to Google urban air mobility companies, and you'll see the amazing amount of investment that's going into these companies. And these are also going to bring another set of issues that beyond the standard drone pickup and delivery. So again, all the more reason why I think local governments need to really understand and come up to speed on these issues. So when we do turn to the planning issues, you're in a certain sense really defining the new circulation elements for your city, if you want to think about it in urban planning terms. And as a result, I think it's not just that city planners that need to come up to speed on drone issues, but also all of the planning firms that often are involved in helping and assisting a city or a county update their general and specific plans. So as Michael mentioned, most of you already have a leg up since you already have your general plan and your zoning elements in the GIS. In addition, as Michael pointed out, we have a wealth of business location data and various community data, really help you understand where drone deliveries will be most concentrated and really where you need to provide drone access. And at the same time, I think in urban planning and increasingly, we're now seeing a move to 3D models of our cities, as you can see on the lower right-hand side there. And I think this represents a very strong trend. And it really is the perfect complement to sort of designing those drone networks. The ability to generate these 3D models for your city is easily and quickly advancing. They're becoming much easier to produce. and really to use in very sophisticated ways. And again, really sort of the perfect complement to establishing these drone networks. So again, let me reemphasize that you want to understand how you can leverage drone technology to your advantage, really by better understanding your city, your businesses, and their needs, really for prompt deliveries. In the case of Detroit, you're going to hear them talk about just-in-time manufacturing, and I think that's a critical area. You need to understand your businesses and your community, and how drones can really be leveraged to your advantage. So with that, I'm gonna stop and actually turn it back over to you, Lisa.
Okay, great. Thank you, Terry. Excellent presentation, and your subject matter expertise in transportation planning really is coming through, making it top of mind now for people who have planning titles to be thinking about how to think of this next dimension of mobility. So super exciting. All right, so with that, Chris Gertwood from Detroit Aerotropolis will now present a short presentation, and then right after that, we'll come back and get to the questions. So on to you, Chris. Thank you.
Thanks, Lisa. Can you see the screen?
Yes.
Oh, perfect, thanks. Hi, everyone. I'm learning a lot thanks to Michael and Terry and Lisa. So I want to give you the perspective from a practitioner, both from an urban planner and an economic developer. And so when you look at the Detroit region Aerotropolis, it's the 4 communities right between Detroit and Ann Arbor. And roughly 10 years ago, the governor in Lansing, Michigan, and some very smart people saw a trend that was happening in the Aerotropolis region that they wanted to reverse. And that trend was residential development happening adjacent to the airport. And so in an attempt to maintain a strong industrial corridor to support air cargo operations, Lansing and the community and the counties started the Aerotropolis. So from a legal standpoint, the Aerotropolis is a public-private partnership economic development corporation, and its mission was really economic development focused on these 3 industries. And that's how do we build out the transportation, distribution, and logistics infrastructure around the airport to support air cargo operations, and then build on our advanced manufacturing industry. As you know, the large OEMs in the automotive industry put the world on wheels here in Detroit over a century ago. And what we wanted to do is we wanted to look to the future of mobility and say, hey, is low altitude airspace the next frontier? And if so, how do we bring in emerging technologies, the OEMs, the manufacturers, and start to understand low altitude airspace? One of the main problems we face here in Southeast Michigan is that as we move from the internal combustion engine to the electric drivetrain, there are about 70% of the parts required in the electric drivetrain as opposed to the internal combustion engine. And so what I mean is, if it takes 10,000 parts to manufacture the internal combustion engine, but it only takes about 7,000 parts to manufacture the electric drivetrain, those tier 2, tier 3 automotive suppliers, what will they do? What business will they transition to? And so as we looked at urban air mobility, advanced air mobility, there was also this component to work hard to recruit advanced manufacturing opportunities in the drone space or the aircraft industry as well. And so you're kind of looking at a twofold approach. One was to embrace mobility in all 3 dimensions, work to build out the infrastructure from an economic development standpoint. And second was, could we recruit some of this advanced manufacturing, the manufacturers of drones, of STOL, VTOL aircraft to the Southeast Michigan area and help our tier 2, tier 3 automotive suppliers transition into the aerospace industry. And so, you're kind of seeing a convergence of a few things happening. And Airspace Link educated us on Lance and what a community could do to really pull the future into the present. And what I mean by that is that, you all have seen these videos of drones operating, but when you bring it to a community level and you get local elected leadership, when you get your planning and zoning administrators, and when you get the public to actually see a drone move and deliver, it becomes real, it becomes more tangible. And so we worked with Airspace Link to upload all of the GIS data in the 4 Aerotropolis communities into the Airspace Link tech stack. And what that allowed us to do is it allowed us to give the communities some control over low altitude airspace. And what you're seeing here is about a year ago, this was one of the first highways in the sky we built in the city of Taylor. And the city of Taylor actually created an advisory. This was a farmer's market. And when we were working with Airspace Link, the city of Taylor, its elected officials, and its planning, its zoning, its economic development department became very excited that they could highlight what sensitive community infrastructure needed to be uploaded into the Airspace Link technology stack, and how that could help manage low altitude airspace from their perspective. And so it's almost as if the city of Taylor and the Aerotropolis communities didn't know they had skin in the game, and the Airspace Link software allowed them to have skin in the game to help manage safe low altitude airspace. And so it was pretty exciting times. And so as we started to learn more and we started to develop, we created this event. And so what we did is we flew a drone at the Lakes of Taylor Golf Club into a specific mailbox. And so it was a fun event. It was attended by about 50 to 60 folks. We had Congresswoman Debbie Dingell out, some local elected officials. And it really just made this all very much more tangible. And so building on that momentum, we started to look at some of the key assets, some of the key economic drivers. And what you're seeing here on the screen on the left is Willow Run Airport. And to the left of Willow Run is the American Center for Mobility. And this is where autonomous ground vehicles are tested. And so a lot of the OEMs test some of their new autonomous driving technologies here. But when you look close to Willow Run, you see a lot of space here. And this space we're envisioning to be transportation, distribution, and logistics, multimodal, intermodal networks. And so in the future, could a 777 fly in, taxi perpendicular to the runway? Could autonomous drone technologies unload that aircraft into an industrial park here next to the airport? And so we're starting to study FAA height restrictions. We're educating ourselves on how to work with the FAA, and Airspace Link has helped us kind of connect those dots. We're not there yet, but we're getting there. And as we move forward, we're writing a few grants, one to the Economic Development Administration, others potentially through the U.S. Department of Transportation, through the state of Michigan. And the goal here is, this is the American Center for Mobility that's located just west of Willow Run. There's a rail line, a Norfolk Southern rail line, that could be extended into the American Center for Mobility. And so what that means is, if we bring this rail line into the American Center for Mobility, could this help us test true multimodal connections between air and ground vehicles? And so how does a train car move along at a grade crossing where drone activity could be taking place? And so that creates so many different testing criteria. So do we now have the opportunity to test new technologies in grade crossing? Do we have opportunities to test new technologies in communication and surveillance infrastructure at the ACM, to test out how to safely move drones next to rail cars, next to autonomous ground vehicles? And so what this leads to is this broader approach, and that's could rail lines, the dense rail lines that were built here in Southeast Michigan, could these be the highways of the sky of the future? And so we start to think about ground risk, and if an STOL or VTOL or drone is flying above a rail line, there's not many people, there's not much activity. And so could that be the safest corridor to connect all of our communities in the future? And then we took that a step further and we said, hey, you know, there's a lot of brownfield sites located adjacent to our rail lines. And on top of that, there are many underserved communities next to old industrial rail corridors. And so from an equity and inclusion standpoint, you know, could we use tax increment finance to really reinvigorate an old industrial site into a vertiport of the future that's adjacent to a rail line? And so, you know, we're starting to really study these things. I think if you look at your community and you look at where the underserved parts of your community are, where you look at the brownfield corridors of your community, are they adjacent to rail lines? And could those rail lines be the highways of the sky of the future for your community? So, you know, using this new emerging technology of low altitude air travel to really transform the way mobility happens and really transform some of the more underserved areas of your community. And so, you know, we in the state of Michigan, we learned a lot of hard lessons over the years, but one lesson we learned is that Fortune 500 companies, they typically invest where they test. And so if we created a robust testing environment for both air and ground vehicles at the American Center for Mobility, would that allow us to attract those Fortune 500 companies and the investments in these new technologies to Southeast Michigan? And so you'll see a lot of new grant applications from me, building on the work we've done with Airspace Link and Esri to build out a robust testing environment, which will follow on hopefully with new investments in new technologies in the advanced air mobility space. And so with that, I'll turn it back to you, Lisa, and open it up to questions.
Okay, great presentation, Chris. And I guess if everyone could come back online, that would be great. So I have a couple of questions that are kind of intertwined here. So let me just cover some that came through the chat. And Michael, maybe you can be the first to answer this one. So the two questions that interrelate are in the context of the FAA's authority over airspace and as the regulator for airspace from the blade of grass up. So the questions are, can you clarify again the role of the Airspace Link tool and how Airspace is working with the FAA? And then where do the local and state governments fit in from the platform perspective?
Perfect. So yeah, it's really a three-legged stool. First one is FAA manages the airspace. We provide that capability through our platform, through our data exchange, to authorize flights. So that's 100% FAA and down to the ground. What the next step is that me as an operator, the second leg of the stool is, well, how do I know? I have to stay in compliance with all the rules and regulations, but I need to understand, am I flying over people? How many people? I have a certain compliance I have to stay with. So that's where the local governments start to come into play, is like that advisory that Chris showed that the city of Taylor, they use our system. They publish that, hey, there's a farmer's market, which is a lot of exposed people, which I would be out of compliance if I flew over that. So they're not necessarily creating a temporary flight restriction. They're actually letting me understand that, man, I better reroute around that area, or, and because I don't want to, fly, add risk if I don't have to. If I can make a 2% adjustment to my flight pattern and I can reduce the number of people by half and build that safety case in seconds, that is where it comes in. So the communities are providing the data to support the operators. That's the third leg of the stool. And ultimately, as you scale, by having these communities on helping out, they're either funding or supporting vertiports, or they're supporting, you know, and like Ontario, California, they want to put a access control takeoff spot for 2 drone delivery service companies from Starbucks and a brewery and a Stater Brothers in this one central location. Well, the community, city has to be involved, and then they have to understand it. And if you could imagine trying to educate every city and county, it's very tough. But luckily, we have a set of tools that you can plug in and make their job a lot easier and provide that data to the industry to scale. So I hope that makes sense that, yeah, the FAA has absolute jurisdiction. State and local government tools are to support the industry. And that's why they have skin in the game, is by providing that data, they're helping the industry be safer. And the FAA likes to know that data is coming from at least some local jurisdictions, and they're participating and supporting.
So it's about getting the aviation data from the FAA, but the localized jurisdictional information, which is just as critical. So drone operators know what they're flying near and over and exposing that through the Airspace Link platform. So in the end, it's not about creating policy necessarily. It's about providing the information to inform operators.
You got it. And most of the time, everyone that wants to put in a policy, by this time they use our system, and it creates what's called an impact assessment. If they were to actually create a ordinance, it actually tells them, well, you would cause this much not damage, but lack of growth economically. There's a value. There's a lot of things that go into that show that.
Great. All right. Thank you. The second question here is about weather active. So how is weather looked at in terms of the safe operations for drone pilots?
Yeah, so our land system has weather built in. We do have a couple partners, IBM and also True Weather. So think of True Weather as super hyper local, where they actually put sensors on the buildings around an area, because the weather patterns really change around large structures and things like that. So weather is important, but it's up to the drone manufacturer to put in their max wind speed that they can handle. And then, so if you could imagine, there's 50 data sets. When you create a flight, it's very complicated, but within the system, it checks the airspace, the ground, the weather, predicted weather, and it does it within a 100-meter accuracy and altitude. So weather is super important. So if you could imagine ordering something and the wind gusts are up to 40 miles an hour, and Alphabet Wing is only viable up to 22 miles an hour, then it might say, would you rather have ground transportation due to high winds? But there are some drones that are now flying through hurricanes. So I have to say that it really depends on the type of use case and the size of the drone, and they're getting stronger and faster.
Great, thank you. So Terry, I have a question for you. This is my own question. So having so much expertise in transportation planning, so for any transportation planners that are on this call today, and knowing how quickly human behavior can shift when there's a new mode of technology coming into the transportation network. We see that with rideshare and scooters and bike share programs. What should a transportation planner be doing about all of this today?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I think there's sort of a couple of different elements to that. On the one hand, as I mentioned, there's sort of that personal pickup and delivery that really, in terms of looking at and really sort of helping to define those corridors in your own community. I especially like Chris's point, though, that what we really need to look at as transportation planners, there's those intermodal connections, and really, how is drone activity, how is that going to become a part really of our intermodal goods movement, of our supply chains? And I think those are issues that I think we need to increasingly start thinking about, that I don't think a tremendous number of transportation planners are really sort of engaging in yet. And I think that's really a critical. And my hat's off to the Detroit Aerotropolis. I think they are asking all the right questions. They're looking at it in the right way, and certainly under the new infrastructure bill, when it does eventually get passed, there is a strong emphasis on really kind of those innovative types of projects. So I suspect that you'll be successful in your proposals, Chris. So anyway, yeah.
All right, on that note, Chris, my next question is, how do you get the leaders on board with your vision? And you've done a great job in Detroit Aerotropolis, getting the key stakeholders to align on carrying out a vision, this vision that you have. So what is your message to some of the other community leaders in terms of how they get alignment like that?
Yeah, it's a great question. We look very closely at our economic base, and Southeast Michigan was, a strong manufacturing community for many decades, and the internal combustion engine, as it goes away, we took a hard look at what that meant for our tier 3, tier 2, tier 1 automotive suppliers, and even the OEMs. And it was a reckoning to start to look at mobility more from a wholesome perspective and not just from an automotive perspective. And that's what brought us in to the aerospace industry. And specifically working with Airspace Link kind of opened our eyes to not only the site selection component, but also the manufacturing component to this new industry. And I think when you're working with local elected leaders, they're keeping a pulse on job creation and retention in their communities. And they should look at some of the legacy industries that may have been standing up their community for many years. But, you know, as the old saying goes, the only thing constant is change. And so we're looking to the aerospace industry in the future.
And you did have a great event with the drone delivery on the golf course. Do you think that helps to show and tell?
Yeah, it was a tremendous way to make it tangible. When you sit there and you see a drone move at the speed it moves and then drop a package into a specifically designed mailbox, and you're only about 50 to 100 feet away, it becomes real at that moment. And I think the more events we do like that will help us embrace this technology in the near term as opposed to the long term. And so I'm sure we'll have more events in the upcoming future.
Thank you. So on that, Michael, when are we going to see scalable drone delivery services in communities? And what is the hurdle that you think is holding it back right now? Is it regulatory? Is it technology? Is it public acceptance? What are your thoughts?
I think it's a combination of that. So as I mentioned, where we're at in the process, so the FAA is going through an ARC process for beyond visual line of sight. That should be wrapped up in the next month or two. It's a big thing to get through. The second piece is there's 14 companies going through their type certification to get their air carrier license. And then third is the infrastructure to support that, is getting that in place. And we're seeing that up in North Dakota is a great example of someone leading the way, stubbing their toes, spending $50 million to get that in place. But that will, as that gets approved, all the locations that we see that we're already deploying, like Aerotropolis, as soon as those drones get approved and that infrastructure gets approved, we'll be able to light it up pretty quickly in these pockets, not every community, pockets of communities. And we're trying to target a few cities and counties per state to be those beachheads, because ultimately the state or the regional transportation community will, the MDOTs, the aviation groups within Department of Transportation will start to grab a hold of this system, but you're still going to need some cities and businesses to drive it. And that's what we're seeing is these localized cities with some businesses or hospitals that want to use it are driving it now. So we're creating the demand, and we need that now. Once that's up and running in that single community, it will spread. And it's really about the first communities per state that we're targeting. So I expect it this time next year. Yes,
Okay.
It will be scaling out in specific
We'll hold you
cities.
to that.
Yeah.
Webinar again next year
Absolutely.
and see where we are. Anyway, so I just want to thank you. We are over time. We were having so much fun that we actually ran over time a little bit here. So thank you to Michael, Terry, Chris for this great webinar. We probably could have talked for at least 2 more hours about this topic. And as I said in the beginning, there will be a recording. So it'll be easy to access. We'll send a thank you email. And with that, I'll just say goodbye now. Thanks, everybody.
Great. Thank you.
Thank you, Lisa.
Yeah.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye-bye.